Thunder rolled as glass trembled and the lights dipped. A gunshot cracked through the mansion's ribs. Carpets drank silence. Michael Kane moved with careful breath, counting heartbeats and exits. He wanted truth, but feared what truth costs. Smoke thinned in slow ribbons. Chandeliers flickered like dying stars. Michael said, "If this is a message, I heard it." On marble, Vince Moretti lay still, diamonds of rain dripping from his coat. A phone buzzed near a bloodied hand. Michael tasted metal in the air, old fear waked. Footsteps paused somewhere above. Elena Rossi whispered from memory, "Trust costs double." The screen lit, a single thread of light in the dark. Michael said, "Show me what you took from us." The message blinked. It promised an answer and a trap. Another buzz cut the hush, and the text read, "It's done. The king is dead. Who sent it from inside these walls?" Sirens murmured far away, muffled by rain and stone. Michael sealed the room and spoke to the dark. Michael said, "If you're still here, you already chose a side." He wanted names, but feared the cost of calling them. The lamp hummed like a trapped wasp. He studied the wound, clean and close, a promise of skill. A single footprint bled water toward the terrace. Michael said, "You wanted me to see this." He lifted the phone, scrolled, found a draft unsent, a number without a name. The draft ended mid-thought. The chill climbed his spine. He pictured Elena's careful smile. He pictured Demetra's silence. The mansion groaned as wind pressed the glass. A floorboard whispered above the library. The unsent draft blinked, then cleared. Who erased it while it was in his hand? The terrace doors sighed open to a wet garden. Michael followed the footprint to the balustrade. Salt wind bit his tongue. Far cliffs pulsed with lighthouse light. Michael said, "You ran, but you wanted witnesses." A cigarette ember glowed in a brass tray, still warm. He feared a name glowing on the ember's edge. He saw it, a lipstick mark, steady, deliberate. Elena had been here, or someone who wanted her shadow. The rain softened to mist, and the sea thudded below. Michael said, "Leave bait, catch a bigger fish." He scanned the grounds. A black sedan idled beyond the hedge, then slipped away without lights. The lighthouse blinked again. Did it blink on a signal he had missed? Back in the corridor, mirrors returned a dozen versions of him. Michael kept the nearest one. He counted the cameras. A dead red dot stared like a blind eye. Michael said, "You killed the king and dimmed the crown." He feared the next crown would fit his head by force. Footsteps drifted behind the walls, soft as dust. He traced cables to the security room, palm flat to feel warm. The knob was cool. Inside, a monitor looped a clean hallway. Another monitor stuttered and froze on static. Michael said, "Old tricks, new hands." A faint cologne lingered, cedar and iron. He pulled a drive from the recorder. The lights flicked once. Would the house fight him too? The grand staircase waited like a verdict. Michael climbed, each step a metronome under a quiet score of rain. He remembered Vince's last warning. Vince said, "You win by seeing who writes the rules." Michael feared the author was already reading him. Upstairs, a hallway stretched to a locked suite. A thin line of light leaked beneath the door. Michael said, "Show me." He set the drive in his pocket, leveled his breath, and eased the handle. A click answered, not from the lock but from a phone on a desk inside. The screen lit with a contact photo he knew too well. Elena's smile cut through the glow. Who had her phone in this room at this hour? Tires screamed in the rain as the black sedan cut across the cliff road. Michael felt fear spike, then harden. Headlights flared in his mirrors. Michael said, "If you want me, come earn it." Wind hammered the car and shook the frame. Lightning stitched the sea. A second set of lights rose behind him. He tasted copper and doubt. Elena's contact photo burned in memory. Michael said, "You left a trail for wolves." The lead sedan braked, boxing him. A figure leaned from the window with a radio, not a gun. The voice crackled. "Pull over, Kane. We talk or you drown." He saw the coast barrier ahead, slick and thin. He jerked right, clipped a cone, and cut into a service tunnel. Would the tunnel give him cover or a trap? Silence hugged the tunnel. Drips ticked like a metronome. Michael parked with lights off and breathed. His hands trembled, then stilled. Michael said, "You almost had me." A stray cat slipped past a grate. Small life felt loud. He opened the recorder drive and checked the files. Static, then a frame of a face. Elena looked past the lens like she felt watched. Doubt bent inside his chest. Michael said, "If you were forced, I find who did it." He leaned back and shut his eyes for one beat. The engine pinged as it cooled. A faint mark on the drive casing caught the light. A brand he knew from old Money Route. Who stamped this mark? And why leave it for him to find? Morning bruised the sky over the harbor. Cranes woke like iron giants. Michael walked the docks and followed the brand to a bonded warehouse. Guards watched without blinking. A banner on a freighter read Santoro Lines. Control lived here and knew it. Michael said, "You like your name on the leash." A foreman stepped close and smiled without warmth. The man said, "Carmine wants peace if you kneel." The gate hummed shut behind them. Forklifts moved like chess pieces. Radios clicked and obeyed. Michael felt the net pull. Michael said, "Peace that starts with a bullet. Sounds cheap." The foreman's smile thinned. A phone buzzed in his vest. He glanced down, then at Michael. Was Carmine Santoro already inside Michael's next move? Old doors groaned in a back alley tea room. Steam curled from porcelain like soft ghosts. Gabriel Chen poured with steady hands and watched Michael's face. Gabriel said, "You chase rage, and rage is faster." The room smelled of jasmine and old wood. Time slowed and held. Michael said, "They boxed me on the cliffs." Santoro sent a leash. Gabriel slid a worn ledger across the table. Gabriel said, "Vince kept 2 books. One for fear, one for truth." Pages whispered. A symbol matched the drive's brand. Pain pricked behind Michael's eyes. Gabriel said, "Loyalty is a debt with compound interest." Footsteps passed outside and faded. The kettle clicked. Gabriel said, "Find the hinge." Doors swing on small iron. Which door would swing and which would fall on his neck? Rain returned by night. Michael stood under a bridge near the rail yard. Freight hissed and clanked. He traced the ledger path to a numbered car. He felt fear, then moved through it. Michael said, "One door, one hinge." The seal snapped with a dull bite. Inside, boxes were false labels. He cut one open. Cash bands and passports stared back. The ledger had mapped a vein to a heart. A light swept the yard. Voices grew near and sharp. Michael said, "If I run, I lose the proof. If I fight, I lose time." He snapped photos, pocketed a passport, and slid between cars. A whistle wailed. Wheels screamed. Would the train carry him to safety or cage him for the hunt ahead? The safe flat above the bakery smelled of sugar and quiet. Morning light felt kind. Michael set the photos on the table and watched steam rise from coffee. Calm sat like a borrowed coat. Elena knocked once and stepped in. Elena said, "You look like you lost and won." Her smile was thin but real. Michael said, "I found a vein in the rail yard." She scanned the images, lips pressed. The kettle clicked. He wanted trust to feel simple. He wanted trust. A van idled outside a beat too long. Elena said, "You did good. For once you did not bleed for it." He laughed without sound. Sugar dust drifted in the light. Why did her eyes skip the one passport that mattered? They ate stale croissants because hunger beats pride. Michael told the cliff story. Elena listened and watched the door more than him. Elena said next time, call before the storm. He felt warmth, anyway. He showed her the ledger mark. She touched it like it burned. Michael said, Gabriel called it a hinge. A siren wailed far off and faded. The room slowed. Elena said, you trust too fast and too slow. He laughed once. They planned to meet with a banker tied to Santoro. Michael said, we bait a hook with truth. She nodded, then checked her phone under the table. The warmth cooled by a degree. Who needed an update before they even picked the street? The banker waited in a glass cube above the river. Sun flashed on chrome and water. Dmitri stood near the elevator like a wall. Dmitri said, I watched the hall. Michael felt relief that tasted wrong. The banker said, you bring thunder or rain? Michael placed one photo on the glass. The man leaned in and smiled with no teeth. Michael said, you move money that moves knives. The man shrugged and praised order. Dimitri's eyes tracked every mirror. Elena paced, counting exits. The banker said Carmine writes rules because you let him. The word struck. Michael heard Vince in the echo. A ripple of doubt opened inside. If Dmitri watched the hall, who watched the room? The fire alarm cried without smoke. Sprinklers held their breath. Doors clicked. The elevator froze half open. Dmitri stepped in front of Michael. Dmitri said, we leave now. Michael reached for the drive. Elena's hand brushed his wrist, gentle and wrong. Elena said, give me the proof. I run cleaner. A security shutter began to drop. The banker vanished behind glass. Michael said, we do this together. Elena nodded and smiled like a goodbye. She took the drive with a soft twist, turned, and slid under the shutter with a dancer's grace. Dmitri held Michael back with iron. The alarm cut to silence. Michael stared at the empty slot in his hand. How many doors had he opened for her? Water fell from the ceiling at last, thin and useless. Michael stood very still. He felt shock fold into air that would not fill his lungs. Dmitri said nothing and looked away. Michael said, you held the door for a thief or a savior. Dmitri's jaw ticked once. The corridor smelled of ozone. Michael walked to the window and watched the river roll like time. He saw Elena exit 2 blocks down and step into a black car. The brand from the ledger gleamed on the door. Michael said, you took the hinge. He laughed once and it hurt. He picked up his phone and dialed Gabriel. The call rang. Where would the next door open if the hinge had moved to her hands? Sprinklers stopped and left a hush like snow. Water ticked from ceiling edges, and the city hummed far below. Michael stood by the glass and let breath return. He replayed Elena's smile. The twist of her wrist, the shutter closing. Shame pressed behind his ribs. Michael said, I handed you the hinge. He laid the ledger flat and traced the stamp that matched the drive. Air tasted of metal and soap. The red strobes faded to gray. He sorted names, routes, times, and saw a pattern hide inside the gaps. A second ledger never shown, a door within a door. Michael said, Vince warned me, rules hide the rule maker. The glass held his reflection and a shadow behind it, whose hand had guided both Elena and the banker to the same thread. The smell of jasmine turned the room into a memory. Steam from the tea rose like old ghosts and carried him backward. Michael sat with Gabriel and heard another night, another ledger, another warning. Pages rustled and became rain on marble. Vince's voice drifted from a year ago. Vince said, you can lose a war by winning each fight. In the flashback, the same brand burned a corner of a shipping bill. Elena laughed in the hallway and did not enter. The sound of her heels faded like a clock. Michael said. We thought we shared the same end. The past overlapped the present, and colors washed together. Paper turned to water and back to paper. The stamps aligned and formed a name that hid in plain sight. Who had taught them to look away at the right time? He walked the harbor alone and listened to rigging sing in the wind. The cranes stood like judges. Michael found the foreman again and asked for silence, not answers. The man obliged with a stare. Michael said, I am not here to beg. His pulse counted slow and heavy. He laid one photo on a crate. The gate cameras watched like crows. The man sighed and looked at the freighter stack numbers. The numbers matched the ledger's hidden column. Michael said, You load truth under wheat and sugar. The man blinked twice, a code for fear. The river slapped the pylons. He turned away and pointed at the office tower across the water. Michael's breath paused. Who signs the orders from the tower with mirrored glass? The office at the tower's top was quiet as a chapel. Carmine waited with hands folded and a gaze that did not blink. The carpet swallowed sound. Carmine said, You mistake motion for power. Michael felt heat at his neck and kept still. Glass reflected two figures, one seated and one standing, same height in the mirror. Carmine spoke of roots, votes, ports, and saints that blessed signatures. Carmine said, Order is mercy. Disorder eats children. Words landed like nails. Michael said, You sell mercy by the ton. Carmine smiled at the city below and praised balance. The quiet felt like gravity. Michael heard Elena's voice in the mirror, soft and far. Who taught Carmine to speak like a priest while counting knives? Night folded over the tower and the city breathed like a slow tide. Michael walked until the river wind cooled his face. Truth had a shape now, and it cost blood to hold. He saw the rails, the ledgers, the mirror, the smile under the shutter. Michael said, I needed a villain. I found a machine. Grief rose and fell like a bell. He let it ring and then let it fade. Water slapped stone. A plan formed from simple parts. Follow the hinge, break the door, flood the room with light. Michael said, I go where they hide the ink. The river carried his words and gave none back. He turned toward the yards and the freighter lanes. Would the light he carried blind him or guide the way to the heart? Rain began as a whisper on steel and grew into drum beats. The rail yard throbbed with distant horns. Michael waited beneath a signal bridge and counted breaths. Headlights crawled along the fence like eyes. Michael said footsteps before the hit. He heard them soft and fast. Dmitri stepped from shadow with water on his lashes. Dmitri said, You should not be alone. The lights flickered. A freight door clanged open and dumped warm air that smelled of paper and oil. Michael felt fear rise and settle into a blade. Michael said, We pull the ink into daylight. A whistle wailed and cut off. Silence fell like a curtain. Which door would burst first when the lights returned? They moved as one toward the lit car. Inside, pallets of ledgers and cash sat wrapped like gifts. A voice echoed from above, steady and sure. Carmine said, You trespass on order. Michael's heartbeat snapped into a march. He stepped forward and held up the photos. Michael said, Order buries bodies under bills. Footsteps rang on the catwalk. Rain hammered the roof. Dmitri scanned the rafters and steadied his breath. Carmine said, You want to trade a city for a headline. Sparks spit from a failing bulb and cut the dark. Michael said, I want breath for those you priced. A shape moved behind crates. The moment tilted. Which truth would hit first, bullet or word? A sharp crack split the air and a light died. Silence rushed in with the smoke. Gabriel stepped from the doorway with a ledger clutched to his chest. Gabriel said, I took what you fear most. His voice shook but held. Carmine's men turned as one. Michael felt time slow and widen. The page edges fluttered like wings. A second shot rang, and the ledger flew from Gabriel's hands. He fell to one knee and smiled at Michael like a proud teacher. Michael said, "Stay with me." Gabriel said, "Doors, small iron." Breath hitched and steadied once, then thinned. The world narrowed to the space between two heartbeats. What price would carry the proof beyond this night? Rage came cold and clear. Michael moved along the crates and climbed the ladder to the catwalk. Metal boomed under his boots. Carmine waited with open hands. Carmine said, "You cannot kill balance." Wind drove rain through broken vents and painted silver arcs. Michael said, "Balance built on graves falls by its own weight." They circled in tight steps. Dimitri pinned the floor below and shouted positions. Sparks fell like hard stars. Carmine swung a baton fast and precise. Michael slipped and caught the rail, then surged and locked the baton with both wrists. Breath burned. He twisted, wrenched, and sent it clattering into the dark. Which man would break first? The one who built the rules or the one who broke them? The baton lay silent. Carmine stumbled and clutched the rail. Michael heard only wind and heart. He stepped in close and spoke low. Michael said, "This ends tonight." Below, Dimitri lifted Gabriel and met Michael's eyes. Sirens flowered in the distance like a slow dawn. Rain softened. Carmine looked to the pallets and laughed once. Carmine said, "Cut one head. 10 grow." Michael pulled the hidden drive from a pocket seam and raised it to the light. He chose not to push Carmine over the rail. He chose to open the door. Michael said, "Let them see you count." He dropped the drive to Dimitri. The sirens grew. What would the city look like when the lights stayed on? Dawn thinned the storm and left the rails steaming. Sirens faded into a dull hum. Smoke curled from the boxcar roof and lost its shape. Michael stood still and counted breaths. The yard birds tested the quiet with small calls. He felt the shake leave his hands by inches. Michael said, "Not victory, just what is left." Rainwater made mirrors of the tracks. He saw his face and the night inside it. Dimitri lifted the last crate and set it down like a promise. The wind slowed and let the city speak again. Michael touched the ladder where the fight had ended. He knew what the silence was saying. Something precious was gone and would not return. The hospital corridor smelled like bleach and sleep. Michael waited by a window that faced a quiet street. He pressed thumb to pulse and felt it slow. Memory flickered. The library lamp, the shutter drop, the ledger falling like a bird with cut wings. Michael said, "If I had turned sooner, who would rise now?" He closed his eyes and saw Elena's hand take the drive. He saw Gabriel smile with pain and pride. The clock ticked as if it did not care. The glass cooled his forehead. The world would keep moving even if he did not. He opened his eyes and let the guilt sit beside the relief. Life would continue, but not as before. Rain tapped the sill of the safe flat. Michael stared at the photos spread like a broken map. Elena stood in the doorway of his mind, not the room. She did not speak at first. Michael said, "You took the hinge and ran." Her eyes in memory were clear and tired. Elena said, "I ran the hinge to light, not to you." Time stretched until the kettle clicked in the present. He wanted anger and found only ache. Elena said, "You taught me to choose the door that opens others." The words echoed and softened the edge. Michael set one photo aside and let the breath leave slow. He forgave her without saying it aloud. A small envelope waited on the tea room counter. Gabriel's careful script held his name. Inside lay a page torn from the ledger and a note. Gabriel said, "Doors swing on small iron. Be the hinge or break the lock." The room smelled of jasmine and old books. Sunlight lay in thin bars across the wood. Michael said, "You left me the map and the weight." He traced the stamp and saw the route clear as day. The past stood beside him and nodded once. A laugh from the street rose and faded. The truth did not feel loud now. It felt steady. A tear found the corner of his mouth and tasted like salt and tea. By evening, the river moved like glass. Michael stood on the embankment with the drive now cloned and safe. He placed one copy in a plain envelope. He slid it into a public drop with no name on it. Michael said, "Let them see you count." The words felt lighter this time. He turned to the water and let the night wind cool his face. A ferry horn rolled soft and low. The city would learn in the morning. He could not shape the story, only free it. Michael said, "I did what I could." He walked away with quiet steps. The path forward waited, not loud, but clear. Morning settled like fresh linen over the harbor. No sirens, only gulls and the knock of lines on masts. Michael stood with hands in pockets and watched the fog burn away. The news vans idled far off, quiet as cats. He read no headlines. He let the air fill his lungs without a fight. Michael said, "What remains is what I carry." The names would travel without him now. The city felt older by a day. The loss sat near his shoulder and did not press. He nodded at the water and the light that found its skin. Was the cost worth the breath he could finally take? He walked the tracks where night had once thundered. Each step clicked like a soft metronome. He carried a small box of trinkets from the fight, then stopped at a rusted barrel. Michael said, "Weight belongs to fire or water." He lifted one photo, then another, and watched the flame take them slow. Smoke rose thin and clean. A train horn sighed miles away. He kept one image of Gabriel and slipped it in his pocket. The rest turned to gray lace. He turned from the barrel and felt the ground steady. The past did not vanish. It learned to walk behind him. Back in the tea room, the recorder clicked and played a saved message. Gabriel's voice filled the quiet and seemed to live in the steam. Gabriel said, "If you hear this, you chose light over noise." The words moved like slow water. Michael closed his eyes and let each one land. Gabriel said, "Truth is a door that never stays open by itself." The kettle answered with a soft breath. Michael said, "I will keep it open when I can." He stood a little straighter and felt the room hold him. One line stayed and would not leave. Doors swing on small iron. The city adjusted its rhythm by inches. Workers crossed the bridge with fresh coffee. A freighter left port with fewer eyes on it. News tickers rolled names that once hid in shadows. Michael watched from a bench and counted the small mercies. A child laughed and chased a paper boat into a puddle. The day opened like a door on oiled hinges. He felt tired in a good way. Michael said, "Let them build on what is true." The wind shifted and carried the smell of bread. Change was not loud. It was steady, and it stayed. Night returned without threat. Michael walked an empty street where windows held warm squares of life. His phone buzzed once and then fell quiet. He did not answer. He stopped under a lamp and looked up. Michael said, "Not an ending?" A breath. The world exhaled with him. Somewhere a bell marked the hour. He felt the echo from the mansion, the rail yard, the river. He touched the note in his pocket and let it rest. Truth must never be owned.